Okay, getting started here, what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to go over Monty's home layout plan. This layout's a little unusual because unlike most of the scale stuff I work with, this is actually Lego. And unknown to most of you, I was actually a Lego train modeler, and that's actually how modelrailroadbenchwork.com got started. I was building tables for doing train shows, and it kind of exploded from there. So to get started today, basically what I want to do is I want to go over this track plan in detail and see if I can just go ahead and point out a couple things, hopefully clean up the track plan a little bit, at least verbally here for Monty, so he has a couple ideas on what to do. Mostly to save himself a little bit of money, because the track plan as it exists will function. It does everything it wants him to do. It's mostly aesthetic things. And realistically, regarding track planning process, there's some do's and some don'ts. So we're going to get started over here in this upper right corner. So we have two main lines on the outer edge here. And then we have kind of a short yard slash classification area. In theory, this works great. In practice, the way this is currently set up, I think there might be a couple problem areas. Most notably, you'll notice that there's two arrival and departure tracks. I think that's a bit excessive, and I don't really think it's necessary. So what we have here is we have one track that's following around the top of the word arrival departure and turns into the green track here. And then we've got a second one here. And then you've got a double slip up in the top and a double slip at the bottom. I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and remove the double slips on both sides. Just create a crossover down here. And what that does is that still allows the same functionality without the extra expense of the track, and it also clears up a little more space for yard, which you need desperately here. Another thing I'd like to point out is these yard tracks are actually fairly short. So if you're unfamiliar with Lego, these track segments, I'll try and zoom in a little here for you. These track segments are about 5 inches long each, so every two segments is 10 inches. So if we go back over here to this classification track, we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 inches of straight track before the curves go back into the switch. Now, fortunately, Monty has done a good job of using the larger switches that are now available through third parties versus the Lego train switches, which are very, very tight radius. It's equivalent to like a number 2 switch versus a number 5 or 6, which is what these orange switches here would be classified as. So the first thing I'd like to do is, since you eliminate this arrival departure track here, the brown one, which is on the bottom of the words here, that opens up a number of spaces so you can shift everything over and get yourself a little bit of extra length. So this 50-inch siding now becomes 60 inches at the shortest. Now obviously you can add a little bit of extra track down here at the bottom, get yourself a little bit of extra distance. And this track over here, actually, you could probably extend another 20 or 30 inches since you're shifting everything over to the right. That'll also make the distance to reach from the walkway, which is the blue here, to the main lines shorter. So if you do have a derailment, it'll be easier to reach. Keep in mind that every two tracks is 10 inches. So if we've got 5 inches here, another 5 here, and so on, we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55 inches from the wall to the front edge of the benchwork. and that is pretty excessive. So if you can push everything back one track, you can eliminate 10 inches on the front here, make it 45 inches, and that's a little more reasonable to reach. Alternatively, you can leave the distance there and have a little bit of room for foreground structures, industry, etc. So what I would like to see happen is, since you are eliminating the double slip switch here, you're going to gain a little extra distance with the track. You can actually straighten out this yard throat a little bit, bring the switch back to about midpoint here. You could actually take a double slip and put it in here instead, and then it'll allow you to go straight into the yard. So that does a couple things. One is it provides you a shortcut. Now realistically, on a real railroad, you would never have a double slip switch on a main line. So if you want to maintain that and set it up the way you have, you can. I would just move these two switches back 6 or 7 segments of straight track here to the corner over here, and then do your secondary switch into the yard throat that way. Now, as far as a yard lead, over here, so you've got the switching lead, you really actually have 2 of them. So you've got this one here with the brown track, and then you've got a secondary over here with the R56 track. So what I recommend is actually swap this out a little bit. Use the larger radius over here, and just use this siding as your switching lead. So in addition to the siding itself, you're also going to gain an extra 40 or 50 inches here just through the switches. So that should make it a little more functional as far as getting trains in and out. Now keep in mind that, you know, with this yard here, this yard is one portion of the layout, and you still need a way to get to the other side of the rail cars so you can bring, you know, your individual cars into your industrial park. So what you need to do over here is you actually need to create yourself a runaround. So since you're eliminating this switch lead here, you can actually flip the switch and make it come down here, give yourself a little bit of a bubble, and give yourself enough room for a 40 or 50 stud long rail car. In real world terms, if you're not a Lego person, 40 or 50 studs equals somewhere between 12 and 15 inches. So they're roughly equivalent to O gauge if you're curious. So what I've said so far here is eliminate the one arrival departure track, move this double slip up here, which will allow you to have a straight in run into your classification yard. If you would like to do that, if you want to maintain the more traditional, more prototypical way of the yard setup, just take this crossover here, push it back here, leave yourself 2 pieces of straight track or 10 inches between the curves and the first switch. That'll prevent a lot of S-curve derailments and that sort of thing. And then put your second set of crossovers in to get into this classification yard. Additionally, you're going to run a runaround down here, which is going to allow you to pull 1 or 2 cars off, run around them, get to the other side, and then take them over to your industrial park. This industrial park is actually the second area I wanted to talk about. Just below the industrial park is a intermodal yard. What I'd like to propose is that you actually switch the two. The intermodal yard is actually going to need a little more room than what you have here. So you want to make it a little bit longer, and if you do put the intermodal yard over here and then put the industrial park down where the intermodal yard was, that will allow you to take this fold down track for engines and such and actually create a bridge over here that you can put up temporarily if you just want to run a secondary loop. It also gives you a little more distance for pulling trains in and out if you need to. You know, this intermodal yard here, you got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, just about 60 inches, so roughly 5 feet of intermodal yard. Now, yes, it'll be long enough for a 3 or a 5 group of intermodal stacks, but if you put it over here instead, you'll have a lot longer distance. And then you have room to spread the tracks out a little bit, so you can put a road in between them. It'll give you a little more room for your ISBU cranes, etc. So in general, it's just going to work better for you. And then with the way the switches are laid out here, just turning this 90 degrees counterclockwise, you can put it over here, and you can use false facades so you actually have things to service for your industrial park against the wall, or against the wall of your stairs in this case. And then with it being a dead end, it's not such a weird transition down here. Another thing that might be worth considering is, well, I know this Basco Bridge is 2 tracks, and you probably already have it built. I think you personally should actually just use the 1 track. Have the 2nd track look abandoned. It'll add some visual interest, and for that matter, the way this is all planned out, realistically, if this were being built in real life, this would just be a 1-track bridge anyway. Or it would be a 2-track bridge, but only 1 track would be used. Because down over here where the red track and the brown track is, that would actually come into a Y switch. You'd go across the bridge here, and then you can eliminate one of these switches here, push this up, and then it dives down into your industrial park. Meanwhile, you can automatically split off into your intermodal yard. Now, if you do need to save space, you can use a 3-way switch just after the Basco Bridge, which will allow you to get into the intermodal yard as well as get into the industrial park while still having a straightaway. So it'll save you a little bit of room there. I like the idea you have here for your town. I do think it might be worth actually expanding a little bit. And one way to do that is actually to use your hidden turnaround loop here, actually. Build up your town area, create like a false wall or something, and then build some town buildings on top of it. And then you can run a bridge or something out on an angle, and what that will do is that will give you some more visual interest. It'll give you more depth. It'll give you more area to build a town, and it'll also help better hide your hidden turnaround loops here. So further down, you have your or Rotary Dump, which this is going to be kind of a really cool scene. I'd love to see how you could actually tie it together into the town somehow, so it wasn't such a narrowly focused scene. If you're trying to do your modeling in a slightly more European way, where they do model more scenes, I think this is a great way to do it. The location is it's not ideal in my opinion, but if it works for you, I don't see why it wouldn't make sense. And it's going to be a fun visual addition either way. I do see the track down here. I think it would actually make some sense to keep this open and accessible. I realize it's only wide enough for the train, but I don't think you want to hide that behind a divider. You can actually, over here, build yourself a little bit of a tunnel entrance and then just make everything over through here back towards your turnaround loops black, so it just kind of disappears. But it is a good idea to maintain access to this, so if a train derails, it's going to be easier to get to. Now I imagine you're probably going to make removable walls and that sort of thing, but you'll find over time that those kind of become a pain in the butt and you get annoyed by them because you have to keep pulling them down because something derails or bumps into it. So instead, just turn it into a scene. You can turn it into half of a tunnel, for example. So you'll put a tunnel entrance over here, the train will go into the tunnel, and then you'll see half of the tunnel with the train going past it. It would be actually really, really great for night scenes if you're doing video recording or photos to get scenes of a passenger train, for example, that's all lit up in a tunnel. So with some creative photoshopping, it could turn into some really great photo opportunities. So going back over to the other side, I'm going to do the top here last. I'm going to come down here. So down here, what you're calling this is kind of a photo area. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And so I also have to imagine you have most of this built already as well. If you don't, however, it might actually be worth going to a single track, unless you plan on parking or staging trains there. Obviously, it'll save you some bricks, but it'll also give you a little more foreground and save you a couple bucks on switches. Another thing I wanted to point out over here, and keep in mind, all of this you can completely ignore. This is just me going through giving you some ideas. The plywood unloader area here, this is kind of, it's going to be a cool little scene. However, I should inform you that in a traditional railroad, you always go through the straight part of the switch for the main lines, and then you go through the diverging portion for a siding. So it may actually make a little more sense for you to put this switch down here, come off the main, and then come straight out. It'll give you something to put in this foreground if you don't already have this built. Either way, it should look really cool, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So over here on the top, at first I was really confused as to what you were trying to do here with the staging yard, but the more I looked at it, the more it made sense to me. This is very well designed for something. In most model railroads, if you had a N-scale layout or something, this would be magical for resetting trains for operation sessions. So not only do you have the main line running through, which is, this track here runs up, runs through, so you can run loops, but you can also run straight, and it dives you straight into the yard. You can run a couple different directions. I really, really like this in a couple ways. So you have plenty of options for trains to load in and out, so you've got plenty of room to park your longer trains. You have a way to get engines off of the trains and switched over to a different setup. So you can recycle the engines if you're running a multiple train op session and you've only got a limited number. You've got some additional siding over here for other engines or other short stuff, like, for example, if you want to run a caboose or something of that nature. The one thing I did want to point out with all of this is if you zoom out on this whole layout, I want to say a good 20 to 25% of the layout is actually hidden staging or something of that nature. And I'd caution you against that. Now, I understand that a lot of these segments are going to be, for example, the bridge down here. This is a segment that is probably something you take out and you take to train shows. And that's great, but there's no reason you shouldn't take the opportunity to do a little bit of scenery on either side of the bridge, for example. And there's no reason you can't add in some scenery in here and actually make this a visual portion. So I do caution you against making it completely hidden. I would incorporate it somehow, but obviously it's staging, so it doesn't need to be real pretty, but throw some weeds down there, throw some disused rail cars in there somewhere, throw a little dirt road across the way with, a rail crew, driving their trucks or something like that. That I think will actually help tie your gravel facility and your ore loader together as well. Another thing that's worth pointing out on all of your layout is your main lines run through your ore flood loader and your ore rotary dump. Now you can bypass it on the bottom right here, but on the upper left you can't. So either way, you're going to have a train running through here all the time. If that doesn't bother you, doesn't bother me, but it is something to think about if you are trying to model in a more prototypical way. Another thing I want to point out real quick is the gravel facility here. This does have some tight switches, so for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is actually the switch radius that Lego makes. Very, very small. In most cases it works. The hobby has used them pretty much exclusively for the last 20 years, but now that we have larger options, it's definitely something worth using. The one thing I did want to point out on the gravel facility area in particular is it is kind of deep, so if you do have a derailment or anything else, it might be difficult to get to this, and I don't know how much of it you're going to be able to see from the walkway over here with it pointed the other direction. So I'm assuming there's some kind of elevation working on here, but it's not marked, so I can't tell. But it's something to consider because you're at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, you're at 60 inches roughly from the front as well. So you have access over here, so you can remove this back panel and get to it if you need to. But keep that in mind when you're building your trains, so you have the opportunity to actually reach them when something does happen. And this is just good practice in general when you're building any kind of model railroad. So a typical kitchen counter height, for example, is 36 inches. And kitchen counters are only 24 inches deep because that is something you can comfortably reach without leaning over. Now at a 36-inch table height, you can reach, with most people, a typical height 5'8" to 6 foot tall. You're going to be able to reach 30, 36 inches. If you put a hand down, you can reach 42 or 48 if you really, really try. 48 is definitely a stretch. So 60 inches is definitely not going to be something you can reach from the front. So you do want to keep that sort of thing in mind. You might need a step stool, or you have to build in more access. Finally, up here in the top middle, you've got the duck under the removable truss bridge. Awesome idea. I think it's going to look really great, especially as the way you have it set up. It's going to be kind of the entry point, so it's going to be one of the first things that people see. Do keep in mind that, considering this is Lego, that if somebody bumps it while they're ducking under it, it could come loose. So it might be worth putting just an extra security device underneath there, just a piece of steel tubing or something, obviously hidden underneath the bridge, but in case somebody bumps it with their back or something as they're coming up underneath it, they don't accidentally rip the bridge right out from its moorings. So with that said, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this layout develops and what it's going to look like when it starts getting built out. I really do hope you give me an update if you do decide to change things, and if you don't, that's great too. I just appreciate the opportunity to give you a little bit of feedback, and I hope that my watchers appreciated my quick little walkthrough, and hopefully you found it interesting and valuable for your track planning as well. As I said, a lot of this stuff does transfer between scales, so it's not just Lego. This will work for O gauge, this will work for N, this would even work for Z scale. However, you would probably have to be a millionaire to build a layout this big in Z scale. That said, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It helps other people find my videos and helps encourage me to keep doing this kind of content. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.